Neil. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome. I can't do it. I was going to do it. Welcome to this version. It's number 18 of Mind Your Language. Mind Your Language. Richard's signing away like crazy down there. It's everything to do with language, communication. It's everything that you might want to get out of this Why Don't You session. So it's Why Don't You of Mind Your Language. It's number 18. We've got number 19 coming up, obviously. Guys, I just want to talk to you about what you want out of this webinar. I'm going to go for Kev first, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'd really like to probably understand a little bit more what people think of the students' language that use, the language that we use, and how we combine the two of them. I think that'd be really interesting, seeing how we work together with language.
Yeah, and the confusion that happens all around. Yeah, brilliant. Once you start signing, you can't stop it. I have to be really careful. Terry, any thoughts about what you want from today?
A nice sunny afternoon would be nice for a change. A nice dinner, something good and watching TV tonight. Oh, you mean from this? Oh, I see. Okay. You know what? It's the same as every time, Fiona. I'm sorry. I'm totally boring. But I have no preconceived ideas. I just want to see what comes out and hopefully have my 2 pennies worth and just listen to what other people think and get some ideas.
Absolutely, yeah. I have to agree with that. I have no agenda whenever we start one of these. I do have maybe 1 or 2 things that I'm interested in. Sammy, what are your thoughts?
Same really. I want to see what these other guys have got to say, especially, you know, we've got some interesting people on here today who are quite expert in language and use of language. I'd like to see how my ideas kind of combine with everyone else's. So I've got no agenda whatsoever, just to listen and to maybe say something every now and then.
Yeah, I personally think, I think we're all experts, every single one of us, because we're used to communicating, and we know right from, if you get a pink license, you know right from the start that communication is really important, really vital.
Communication is key to getting good results. And
language. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sammy. Neil?
Yeah, mine's pretty much the same as the other guys. I just want to see how other people use language in different ways, that's all, and see how it differs to what I use with my students as well.
Fab. Yeah. I think it's, for me, it's language both sides.
Yeah,
it's
two-way, isn't it?
And it's not even just language, it's all of this stuff as well. It's the intuition kind of, you know. Language, it's all of it. It's all of it. I saw Kev do a little tiny micro expression then. I saw that. Has anyone got any starting points? Because we've got Richard, because Richard's got his specialty, and we've got Chris here. But I think we're all really good at it. One of my things, what do I want out of this? I want people to, by the end of this, see how important it all is. Because we've all sat in the car and we've explained it the way we've always explained it, and everyone else has got it, and what's your problem? Because it used to make me feel like I was doing something wrong. Everyone else has got it. What have I said differently this time? And I'm like, I haven't said it any differently. But language isn't about what we say, is it? It's about what we understand. And for me, it's interesting having Richard here, because, you know, language, when I was trying to learn BSL, and it was like, mother, Mother, how many mothers can we have? We have all sorts of mothers, you know, we just have so many different kind of things. Chris, you've always got something to say. I can call on you.
So they say. I'm interested in what people don't say often, or what they don't realise that they're saying. So it's the subtleties of it, that sometimes when you've got something that you're saying and you, as you've just explained, you know what you're saying and they don't quite get it. That's frustrating. But I think sometimes you can say things and you know exactly what you're meaning to say behind it as well. And that's the bit that personally I find really interesting. And I think when people come up with things that work, sometimes you can spot something behind that is why, you know, the wheels behind it, if you like.
Yeah. I think that's why client-centered learning works so well, because if you do hear from them, the communication's there in the first place. There's no loss, because if they're explaining to you what they already know and you fill in the gaps, there is less loss. It's lossless, which is another thing. It's lossless. There was something else I was going to say. There's even the point of language, and it was something I got, and I really valued that from your course, Chris, when you said the don't.
The not processing it.
Yeah, well, they're not processing it, but what happens when you say, don't hit that car?
What? Yes. Don't look at the gear lever.
Yeah.
Don't drop
Don't
that
think about-
teacup with the hand-painted periwinkles.
Yeah, everyone just paused there. Everybody froze in there. Well done, Sammy. You just make everyone freeze. But that's exactly how it is. And this is, you know, we're not getting anywhere because it's just me talking at the moment. But okay, I'm going to dump on someone. Communication-wise, Richard, because that's you've got a little bit of a difference. So brief summary of why communication could be different for you. You've got to remember to unmute yourself. I would do it if I could.
Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
I'm getting a bit of loss of signal occasionally. I might have to move a bit closer to the house, but tell me if it goes, and I'll do something about it. Yeah, I think I got what you said. Asking about sort of what do I have to be aware of communication-wise. I think without turning it purely into a session about teaching deaf people, I think it's important for everybody. It's not to realise that when we're teaching, it's not just what we say, it's what we don't say that's important. And people that are relying on body more than the spoken word, more than hearing, more than, you know, it might not be the first language or whatever else. They're watching you like a hawk to see what your reactions are when you're putting a message across. So, you know, if I tell you or try to tell you that I absolutely love a particular thing, and my eyes are not transmitting the same message, it springs out. And it's the same with body language. You know, when we all try and stay calm, we all try not to get frustrated, but it comes out in everything we do. It's the tone, it's the manner, it's the eyes, it's the body language, and I think for me that's something that I'm sort of acutely aware of, particularly with teaching deaf people, is that you can't say one thing or sign one thing or write one thing and mean another, because you'll get caught out. You know, we talk about experts in communication. Deaf people are experts in communicating with hearing people. It doesn't work the other way around necessarily, but they have to deal with hearing people every day of the week. So I think sincerity, honesty in what you say and what you do are very important when you're teaching, to get your message across.
I think it would help, Richard, if you do go a bit closer to where your router is in the house. It would help because you do break up a little bit.
I'll mute myself, and if you carry on, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, brilliant. So because what Richard was saying there, I think is really interesting. It isn't. So, you know, and I hope Richard will still be able to hear me. I don't know, you've all seen people, everybody here has had someone say, oh, I've got someone coming to me who's deaf or hard of hearing. What do I need to do for them? Well, who is the only person who's got the answer to that? And we forget to ask them. Everyone says, oh, well, you can go and do this and you can go and do that, or you can use Google Translate. Well, if their reading skills are, you know, not as good as, or not, because their English for them is a foreign language. Spoken English is a foreign language to anyone who uses sign language. It's a foreign language. All the syntax and verb endings and things. So we're not going, I mean, I didn't mean to go down that route. It's just that you know, Richard's kind of started us off on that. But because there's language for, how many of you guys, who wants to say something about the international people, minding your language with international? You've all taught people with first language, not English.
I have what Richard was saying about using your whole body, your whole, you know, your whole persona, being genuine. When somebody doesn't speak your language, so it's similar to being hearing impaired, is being a speaker of another language. And I've got kind of first-hand experience of that because I lived in Holland, and when I first moved there, I didn't know any Dutch. And I used to really look at people, look at their expressions, look at what their body language was saying to help me to understand what they're actually verbally saying. So most of it I actually didn't understand verbally. I understood what they were saying by what they were doing. And so when using that experience with a pupil, I was really aware of that. And I think that helped. And yeah, you need more time, I think, you know, at the side of the road than you would with somebody who you can just, you know, an English person or English speaker, fluent English speaker, to get that body language, to be able to have that conversation where you're actually looking at each other.
Yeah. So there are definitely barriers with all forms of language, definitely barriers. And we know what we do. We know what we do to help that. It's obvious when someone's got a communication, but sometimes people understand things much more clearly. Have you found that people understand you much more clearly than when they try and explain something to you?
Yes.
Has anyone found it more difficult? Those of you that prefer the more coaching style of approach, does anyone find that more difficult? Yeah. Chris, was that hand up to speak, or an agreement? Yeah.
Both. Yeah, I think I talk too much sometimes for foreign pupils, and you know, I'll change how I do it. But when I feel at my best is when I'm using my language, and if I can't, that becomes a much bigger challenge. So yeah, I think it's also that words mean different things in different countries. You know, there's the thing that I never know if it's true or not, but that, you know, Eskimos, Inuit have lots of words for ice because they got lots of ice, and it means different types of ice. And I think we do the same. British people, we've got lots of words for rain, and having the meaning of the word, sometimes you've got to challenge it. And I always remember one pupil that came to me. He'd done loads of hours, really struggling. We figured out he didn't know what a junction was, and he didn't know what the word junction meant. So we looked at that, and once you had more of an understanding, but when you've got that language barrier, it's hard to get to that level of understanding, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges. And it's not necessarily that my expertise of using less words, so I'll go quiet.
Yeah, quiet. Yeah, it's something I find very difficult. Yeah, Richard, I am putting my thumb up to acknowledge, which is I don't think you were here for that bit. So you're not unmuted yet. So while you unmute yourself, when I put my thumb up, I have actually seen that you're trying to speak. I'm sure it's not meant to be this difficult where you unmute yourself. There you
Can you
go.
hear me?
Yeah,
Um,
got you.
Yeah, the problem is I'm only seeing the person who's speaking, so perhaps because I've got a different selection on my screen or something.
Right, so top right, this is why I try and encourage people to come in a few minutes early so that they can get used to the technology. There is a gallery view. So on your iPad, you'll get up to 9 people. You won't get everybody if we've got more than 9. Linda might be able to help.
Got it now, thank you. Yeah, sorted. So, just following on from Chris's point there about misinterpreting and understanding language. I had a student, foreign student, earlier this year, and we were really struggling. She was a very good driver. She was doing most things very well, but we were really struggling with the larger roundabouts. So multiple lane, approaching, choosing the correct lane on the approach to the roundabout, and then choosing the correct lane on the roundabout. So using what I would normally have used, very used to doing from my police days, numbering the lanes. Lane 1, 2, 3. So we're approaching it. There's 5 lanes. We want to approach in lane 3. As we go on to the roundabout, past the traffic lights, we're going to go into lane 1 and head for the second exit. And we just could not get it. We were drifting over lines, constantly getting it wrong. And we did pictures and we did all sorts. And then all of a sudden, something clicked, and I just pulled a picture out, an aerial view of the roundabout, and said, "Can you point to lane 1 for me?" And she pointed to lane 5. She was counting from right to left, and I was counting from left to right.
Managing the risk and the problems with communication. What a perfect example. Perfect example. Yeah, thanks, Richard. Steve.
Yeah, just kind of following on from that, actually. If you are teaching, students from different countries, I think we also have to watch our idioms, if you like, and certain things that we might say as a matter of course. Everyone's got their own little phrases that we use, especially our instructor jargon that I'm not a massive fan of. It's not going to make a lot of sense to certainly. So you're also almost putting yourself in the process of having to explain what you're trying to explain by using that phrase in the first place. It's something I found myself doing, and luckily, I mean, the lady that she's from the Ukraine, and possibly one of the funniest people I've ever taught in my life, had absolutely no problem in telling me she didn't have a blasted clue what I was talking about. So, but I think many people perhaps wouldn't tell you they don't understand for the fear of looking stupid. So I think it's for us to try and rein that in sometimes.
I did that on my reverse around the corner with both of us, first language English, and he said, "Do you understand?" And I said, "Yes." No idea what you're talking about. So I know what you mean, Steve. There was another thing with the jargon. I used to do a hint thing. When someone was driving along, and I used to, rather than say what gear to go into, I used to say "and into," with the inflection, "and into," and she went, "I am into," because she was in gear 2. So it's just one of those things. It's the phrases that we use can just really, and it was a distraction, because obviously then she then looked down and, I'm not helping. I am not helping in that moment. Sammy.
Yeah, a very similar student, Latvian. She wanted me to talk her through the roundabout. And so I was doing it, talking her through each time, and each time she wasn't getting it. And so we stopped and had this conversation where what we decided to do was to get her to talk herself through in her own language. So off we went. She did it in her own language, and bingo, straight away she did it. And I think it's because when you're a speaker of another language, you have to first process what someone said to you, and then you've got to translate that in your head, and then your brain's got to tell your body to do it. and that's really difficult, and that's something we need to be aware of, really. You know, bazoom.
Yeah.
Did I say
Fantastic.
bazoom?
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. So, and that's the fascinating bit. It's interesting that when she was doing that, obviously you didn't detect a risk, Sammy. You weren't, because I can hear a lot of people going, oh, but if they're not doing it in my language, I won't know that they're. But
no, that side of things doesn't bother me, because I know I'm in control of everything. But I knew by looking at her, I could tell that she was more confident in what she was doing. I had no idea what she was saying, but I knew that she was doing it. She was saying it, and that's all the difference. It was instant then for her, instead of having to do the extra processing.
Yeah. Well, another part of language, I still can't stop. Another part of language is intuition.
Yes.
So you were using your intuition, although she wasn't speaking a language that you were familiar with at all. You could tell that she was calm. You can hear it. You were using all of the language skills, even though the words aren't making any sense at all.
Yeah. So the words mean
Kev.
nothing, really.
Absolutely. The words mean nothing. Kev, and then Terry, promise.
Yeah, I think sometimes what we do is we don't actually, and this comes from my experience, we don't actually realise what we do. I know Chris touched on it when he said, you know, he realises he talks too much. But sometimes we don't actually realise what type of questions we're doing. We don't realise we're not actually looking at the student when we're talking, and they struggle with that. So finding out what we do is a great starting place, I find. And once you recognise what you do, then you can see if that was the problem that might have actually helped.
Yeah, I can see Richard crazily mining videos. Get your videos on in your cars, guys. Get your GoPros and your videos on in the car. Watch yourself, listen to yourself. See how many questions you actually ask people, Fiona. Oh, sorry. Tends to be 2 or 3 in a row. Drives me nuts. And yeah, and that's what, if you do actually turn that video camera around for some of the time, it's quite painful.
Painful, but good.
Yeah. Well, we need to learn about ourselves as much as, I think that's what these are about. This is all about us learning about how can we get better. And sometimes it's weird how we can do it. I hope you stole his thunder. What do you reckon? I don't think you did, Kev. I think he was doing something else. Come on, Uncle Terry.
Are we allowed to change tack a little bit?
Of course.
So I want to pick Chris's brain on something, if that's all right. Just want Chris's opinion with his NLP background and everything. His opinion on the word "we" and the use of the word "we" in a coaching environment.
Well done, Terry. I'm glad you brought that up.
A really, really good question. It's that, you know, when I've been hanging out with lots of people who NLP or just people who are language, you know, interested, you can spend a whole day on we, and I think the thing about set Fiona off. The thing about the process, I think it's a really good rapport builder when you're starting out. So, but we've got to remember that we're developing someone who's independent at the end of things. So, the one that I noticed, and I'm sure you guys have, is when they start referring it as their car, and they start taking that kind of ownership, that it becomes their car and their actions rather than the thing that we're doing together. So I think the use of the word "we" is really strong at the beginning, and it's a nice way to mitigate mistakes, and you know we can both share in that, and you can do the same thing with the general population as well. The other drivers, that person next to you. I've got one of my big things that I hate is the word learner. I don't have learners in my car. I have drivers. From the moment that they start, their drivers, because we don't want it to end at the driving test. So we want it to continue through. They're going to be a driver. Why stop that? So in the same way, if you're at the beginning talking about we being a collective and we're working together, then we want to move that across and become the independent person at the end of it. So, you know, that's, yeah, for something that is massive. Those little words often are. But for me, at the beginning, yes. At the end, I want that independence. And I think we all do it when they pass their test and they turn around and they say, couldn't have done it without you. And you say, oh no, you did it all. It was all about you. And we undermine ourselves 100%. And that's the job. And we move on to the next one. Or, you know, we focus on the other things that need work. But by being able to make use of that approach of tackling it together and working as a partnership, but then also letting them have their independence, you know, that's where I would, you know, would put my
That's
approach
nice.
to it. There are plenty that would disagree.
Now, I like the use of when you said, you know, when you're getting to, and it's we, how are we going to tackle this as a team? So that's really nice. But it's the other aspect of the word we that I'm allergic to. Terry, interesting. I don't know if you remember this bit, Chris, but Terry said a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Terry, and you were talking about when your learner said, I want my mirrors back. And it's that ownership. So it's when you start to really think about language and what it is, and the I and the we, and it really does change. So that's, I'm just trying to remind you, Terry, of you actually do it and you notice it. And it's just interesting when you bring stories back from other things in this. But thanks, Chris, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's the, there's a, would you agree that there can be a sort of patronizing element to the we and the I and the you thing? And it just depends on that. And I know people don't do it that way. I think it can just sound it when you sit in the back and somebody says, can you come and observe my sessions? And there's a certain uncomfortable that I have when I hear. Kev, do you know what I mean?
Sort of, yeah. Sometimes I don't know really what you're thinking and I just have to guess, but I can, from your body language now, I'm assessing. I think sometimes, yes, you know, we as a group of driving instructors, I'm going to phrase it there, I use the we as a group, but me as an individual, I'd like to see them from the beginning, like Chris says, and taking what they know already and what they are progressing to. And they will come up with their own ideas and things. And I think it's relative to what you were saying, but it's about them, we, us, and, you know, putting all that together. And again, it probably relates back to what I said earlier about knowing what we're doing. Do we notice what words they're saying? And most of the time, we don't, as a group of driving instructors, know what they're saying. So just being interested in them and the words they use can make a difference.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And it's good because it led Steve on to say something. Steve, and then you, Phil.
Yeah, kind of that, and what Chris was saying about from the minute they get in the car, they're not a learner, a driver.
Yeah.
When we start, or when I start, or when we start to talk about post-test and things like that as well, I always talk about not continuing for them to think of themselves as a learner, think of themselves as having the most up-to-date training available, because that's what they've got. Because I think there is that kind of thing there where they go after their test and they still think they're still a learner up here. And I think the sooner, once they've got those skills, the sooner you can get them thinking more like the driver than the learner. I think it's better for them.
Yeah.
If that
Yeah,
makes
I've
sense.
changed. I've tried to change. I try not to use the word I do try not to. It's very difficult. I tend to say new drivers if I'm being specific. I think because I have so many different people in my car, you know.
I think if that's the word that they're continually using, it's even more difficult because you're pitching backwards and forwards, aren't you? So if they're calling themselves a learner, it's very easy for you to carry on that conversation in the same way.
Yeah, I think someone's nicking your car, Steve.
It's not me, fortunately.
But that categorization, that is really important when people call themselves a this. It does sit with them. You know, at what point do you suddenly become a not learner then? Yeah, it's really good. It's a really good point. Phil.
Yeah,
then Sammy.
Carrying on a little bit from what Kev was saying about being aware of the pupil's language, you know, using the pupil's language back to them as well. So we do need to be aware of what they're saying. For example, I had a girl who referred to the clutch brake instead of the biting point or whatever. That was her words. And every time we went out, if I used the word biting point, she didn't have a clue what I was talking about. But if I said, get to the clutch brake, she was absolutely fine. So, you know, listening carefully to them and using their language back to them. And also getting definitions of what they might mean by something. And another pupil who would regularly try and kill us on a roundabout, and we would say, how did that go? And she said, I thought it was good. And, you know, in the end we said, well, what's your definition of good? You know, because it wasn't. But, you know, getting yourself onto their level with their language. So I think that, yeah.
Yeah, it's repeating things back. Because there's getting used to their language. What did that mean to you, Phil?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Because I mean, that was just a really good example, because when I said that phrase back to you, you couldn't answer it straight away because you had to think.
Yeah, yeah.
So repeating it back, I've nicked that from Kev, don't tell him. But it's repeating it back, and then it makes them think about the language they're using, and is that what I meant?
Yeah.
And then it's the chance to clarify. Sammy, I think you put your thumb up.
No, I was just putting my thumbs up to something somebody said, but I can't remember what it was now. But I like.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Richard. Then.
I do agree.
Oh.
I do agree with the using the language to suit them, their language. Because you know, you saw my one about using belly buttons for junctions, where there was in and outies, and that was their idea, you know, to say that, and it worked for them. So whatever works for them, if they can drive safely, and they understand it, then it doesn't matter what language they use.
Yeah. Got you, Chris. Richard was first.
Yeah, I was just following on from the sort of clarifying language. I think it's fair to say that, as a generality, that we're very British in the way we communicate. And by that what I mean is really polite. And that causes a massive problem when we teach it, because, and it's happened on here, people don't quite understand what people say sometimes. Instead of going, no, I don't understand what you're saying, we fudge it. We go, yeah, whatever, or move on. And I've had it in the spoken version, I've had it in sign language. The classic one was my Chinese student who kept referring to cloth. And I had no idea what this cloth was she was referring to until about lesson 6, when I just went, look, I'm going to have to stop you here. We pulled over and I said, can you tell me what a cloth is? And it was a clutch. She was struggling to say the TCH of clutch. And I just had no idea what she was on about. So I was missing all sorts of stuff, all sorts of information that she was trying to give me because I didn't understand. And instead of stopping and checking and finding out what it was she was trying to talk about, I just kind of carried on because it was a bit embarrassing. I didn't quite catch it. And it happens, as I'm sure Fiona's aware, a lot with sign language. You know, because I'm level 2, 2.5 of many levels. And it's embarrassing to sort of admit that you don't understand what people are saying or signing, But in our environment, we must make sure we understand. And sometimes we have to sort of lose face and say, look, I really don't get what you're on about. Can we just stop and talk this through so we both understand the same thing?
Yeah. I had a really good example with someone, her communication wasn't really a problem. But I had to say what happened, because she didn't seem to respond to the massive roundabout in front. And it was her culture and how she grew up. She's not used to recognizing a vast roundabout. You know, the kind of roundabout that sits on top of a dual carriageway or a motorway? That, to see it as a junction rather than just a deviation of route, she had no idea. So the language was the problem there, because I said, when you get to the roundabout, you're taking the first exit. Well, she never found the roundabout. Because it was, again, had to pull over and say, I don't understand, and take ownership for the not understanding bit. And I think that's really important. Would you agree, Richard? When you're in the car with anyone with any kind of communication thing, they're used to their interaction with the world, and it's what you said earlier. They are used to it, whether it's a person whose first language isn't English, or if it's a deaf or hard of hearing person. They are used to trying to struggle and get their message across. We're the ones who are new to it, so we do have the embarrassment factor. And I agree. I cringe all the time when I don't understand.
Yeah, we make massive assumptions, and I've had exactly the same thing where I've had to stop and pull over, and I use a lot of the sort of aerial photographs for these sort of things, and pull over, and particularly when you're teaching people with language issues, deaf or otherwise. I think the picture speaks 1,000 words, and just to pull over and pull up a picture of that round of junction 28 on the M1 and say, look, and they look at it from above, and it's like the light bulb, suddenly you could see it come on almost. Oh, look, yeah, there's a roundabout. I can see it now. But when you're on the ground, when you're driving it, we assume it's a roundabout because we've been around thousands of them. But people haven't been paying attention for how many years of what that means, or have come from a different place. They just don't see it until you actually show them that picture and say, look, it's a roundabout.
Because I kept repeating the instruction. When you get to the roundabout, when you at the roundabout. So I was getting all panicky because, but it was an interpretation thing. So it is, again, the language. I should have been clearer. The roundabout is here.
You might as well say it the banana.
Yeah. So it's all about this important communication. I've forgotten who put their hand up. Someone put their hand up. Oh, it was Chris. Yeah, I knew it was someone.
Thank you. I think there's a really interesting and fun thing that I think we do naturally, but you can do more. And I encourage PDIs to do it a lot, which is to take the thing that the person is interested in and try and use that language of, if it's a chef, talking about the recipes. And I think we do it really naturally, but it works. And they've proven that things like, if you're going to ask someone for a favour, if they're into horse riding, talk about there's certain hurdles that we've got to jump over to get there, and they're more likely to say yes and do what you want and work with you. And I think that's something that is a really good way of starting to bring in new language that's not your own to be able to to help people in that fashion. And it's good fun. I get a bit of a kick out of how many different things can I do. You just have to be careful because sometimes they get a bit, it's almost patronizing, and you have to apologize. But hairdressers are my favorite. They're there's lots of haircut analogies and things that you
interesting snippet of information for us.
So, I've got a question actually that Sammy might be able to to say something about, which is from a pupil who she was a full license holder actually, and she'd come over to the UK and was really struggling from Holland, and it was the language of the road rather than the spoken language, that the lack of signs in Holland, the lack of road markings and signs, and it's all been stripped back. She was getting drowned out with the amount of communication being given to her by the road in front. And I thought it was someone who's been over there. Was that something that she'd experienced?
Yeah, I did notice when I came back how many signs we've got in this country, and the roads are different. I mean, for example, going on and off a motorway, you go on and off in the same lane, don't you? And things like that. It's a lot different here. So yeah, overload of information is a big problem.
I believe the shared space initiative came from Holland, I believe. If anyone's got any other information on that, I'm pretty sure the shared space idea where you take everything away, because above all, cyclists in Holland have got priority. Just cyclists, which is, I wish we had it. Wish we had it. Kev, I've got you, Kev.
One of the phrases, I mean, it's going back to sort of like being, it's related to probably all of this, but one of the phrases I use now is just be curious. And if you're curious of sort of like the pupil next to you or someone next to, or the person you're having a conversation with, it's amazing how much information you can get out of them that you didn't even know was there. And that's the way I'm just curious now. There you go.
Yeah, I think it's the listening. It's an extension of the listening, isn't it? That vital listening. And I think what you're talking about, Kev, is there's all very well listening, but if you're curious, you're going to ask another little, you're going to ask for a little bit more.
Maybe a little bit more information on that, and you do it in a way that you sound interested. Yeah.
And it's how you find out, what Chris was saying, how you find out what someone's hobbies are. So then you can tailor the language. Yeah, really nice. Richard, I don't know if you put your hand up or if it was just up from before, because I'll go to, if you had something to say, because Steve was next if it's not you.
It was just very quickly following on from the point about Holland and signs and sign overload. Police training, classic. I'm sure you've all done it as well. What was the last sign you passed question? And how many times do you get? No idea. There is a massive issue with overload of signs in this country, but the stripping back as well. There's a road in Nottingham where they're doing an experiment on the edge of the city, where they've put parking bays at the side of quite a wide road, and then they've took the other lines out completely, so there's no centre line. And it's amazing that it actually has an effect even on me as an experienced driver to go slowly down this road. There are slower speed limits anyway in the city, but the fact that the lines are not there make you pay more attention to your position on the road than if the line was there.
That's it. Well, actually, when you take away the rules, it forces people to be an adult.
Yeah, heaven forbid.
Which I'm a big fan of. Thanks, Richard. Steve.
Yeah, just about what Kev said about curious. I think as well, it's looking out for when the spoken words don't quite match the emotions that you're getting as well. So that curiosity's really got to be there. So especially if it really isn't matching, if someone's saying they're absolutely fine and they're sort of like that, then you've got a problem. So I think it's the unspoken as well as the spoken.
Well, yeah, because you need to ask, because the tension could just be they need the toilet. They're actually fine about the junction and the drive, but it could be something else completely.
I think
body language, they're getting their own body language.
It's also being able to, it took practice to actually have the confidence to be able to do all of these things together while you're on the road. I think it's something, there is the school of thought that have the kind of the eyeball mirrors. I hate the word eyeball mirror. That's not what I use it for. There's a school of thought that sits very much on the side facing that person. That scares the living daylights out of me a little bit. I think there's so many different ways, and it's finding a way that you can do it comfortably and a way that you can do it where you actually still feel in control as well. But it's very much a skill that needs practicing, I think.
I totally agree. I have a habit when I sit in the car. I have a habit when I wear my sunglasses. I'm quite sensitive to bright light, so I wear my sunglasses. But then when I say something, I just put them down, and then I put them back up, and then I put them down. And one of my drivers said to me, why do you put your glasses down? I can't see you anyway. I can't see you anyway. Why are you putting your glasses down? And I said, okay, I'll leave them up. Oh, I don't like it. There was a really subtle thing. It's a really subtle thing. And just the gesture is, I'm removing my barrier. And even if somebody's looking straight ahead and they don't seem to be concentrating, you've gone all fuzzy now. But when we say mind your language, it's all about all of these tiny subtle things. And I think Kev's going to do a summary, but what I'm hearing is actually the language is more about their language, and it's more about us listening to their language, looking at what is that person actually telling me words-wise, without words-wise. I'm doing your summary, Kev.
You carry on. You carry on.
Well, you do such a good job of it. But to me, that's what I'm hearing. I haven't got anyone else to go to now. Come on, someone. Oh, Neil, go.
Yeah, I've been listening, and a lot of it seems to be around what we're saying to the pupil. Many years ago, I had a foreign gentleman and I had to teach through an interpreter. And that felt uncomfortable as well, because I wasn't quite sure what they were saying in their language, whether they were transporting what I was saying or trying to get over. So that felt very uncomfortable as well. So just thought I'd put that out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never really know. Chinese whispers. I'm always reminded of the Chinese whispers aspect. And it is really difficult to know. If we're talking about listening, then I'm going to ask you guys, what do you do to make sure you're not missing the unspoken? What tools do you have? Silence and no hands. Richard, I'll come to you in a second. Kev put his hand up first. Kev?
I was going to say silence. You stole my thunder.
What else do you do?
Allow them, and if I'm not sure, confirm it. Confirm, but just, confirm something you're not sure about. I know we mentioned it earlier, but allowing them to explain it in their terms and then clarifying it back to make sure they know exactly what they're doing. But at the same time, you're doing you're nodding, making sure they know that you're listening as well. I won't say too much more.
I think it's giving them the opportunity.
Yeah.
I think it's those pauses as well, isn't it? The time in between. Or giving people the opportunity. Like, I don't do it very often, but sometimes I say to people, I'm coming to you in a minute. And I give them even on here, and I try and say, in a moment, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you a question. The question is, and then it gives people time to think about what they would respond to. Richard, did you have your hand up to say something? I think someone else did as well.
No, it was really mainly agreeing with what was said there by Kev, the paraphrasing, get people to tell you back, to see whether they've understood. And just as a slight aside, a tool that I've used on a number of occasions is to swap seats and get them to teach me. So drive towards a roundabout, tell me when to change gear, tell me what gear to change, tell me what to do, and then debrief it after they've done it. It shows them, how much ahead they need to be thinking as well, because they're starting to think, I need to tell them in time for them to do it. But it also gets you to hear what they're thinking. And if they miss something glaring, it gives you the opportunity to go, well, why didn't you mention that at that particular moment? It might just be because it's a new experience, but after a couple of times, they'll get used to it. Yeah.
It's interesting when we listen and think about what you've just said, Richard, and combine that with what Sammy said, where Sammy didn't know what was being said. So it's really very fascinating. Yes, I'm coming to, because I think it was Sammy, then Terry, then Steve.
Yeah, my phone started ringing. Okay. I was just going to say about the pausing, and then you started talking about the pausing. It's about giving them space to create what's going on in their head, like the phone ringing. it'd be my mother. So just asking those questions and then just sitting and not being afraid of that silence, and wait, and just wait a little bit longer, and the phone will stop ringing and they will create their answer.
We can always come back to you, Sammy. We'll go to
That's
Steve.
fine. That's all
And
right.
we
I've
can
finished
say,
now.
and
the
I can
phone
come
stopped.
back. Yeah. And I can say, and anything else, Sammy. And it's
Yeah.
where you, it's that.
That's
and
okay. I've
anything else.
finished
But
now.
that's a Kev. That's a Kev mix. Yeah, that was really, Steve, then Terry.
Just about the whole asking for confirmation, I think that's good for verbal and non-verbal as well, because some people just do have resting grumpy face. It doesn't mean to say that they don't get it. It just means that, you know, you don't always assume that what you see in their face is the answer either, I think.
Absolutely. So, like I said, this language thing, it isn't just about the spoken word. It's all the listening, and everything else is nice. Terry.
Sorry, spacebar wasn't working. Just kept reminding me of something I say to PDIs. You know, if you want to learn to listen, learn how to shut up. Simple as that, really. And some have that response. Some say, "What?" It's simple as that. If you don't learn to listen, you've got to shut up.
I had to do things in the car. Got you, Richard. Just 1 second. I had to actually hang something on the dash, and it was just in my face the whole time. So it actually forced me to keep my mouth shut. I have on occasion put things in my mouth as well for some learners, and they really appreciated it. I usually had to take their fist out of my mouth. Occasionally, Richard, go.
Mind your language, Fiona.
Yeah, it was just going back to what happened there with Sammy and the telephone. I think that actually reminded me of a good point when we were talking about communication, getting messages across, whatever, is how difficult it is to actually pay attention to a message that somebody's saying when something else is going on, particularly if you're teaching deaf people. And if something else is going on in the background, you're not always concentrating on what's being said, are you?
Fantastic, fantastic, love it. Fantastic. How you grew a tail there was amazing, Richard.
My Basil Brush days. But it does
That's
make
a
the
really
point,
good
though,
example.
that, you know, if you are parked up, particularly with somebody where they need that, you know, they need to see your lips, they need to see your face. Are you parked in the dark? Are you parked with your back to lights? You know, there's all sorts of situations where there could be distractions going on. Do you ever think when you stop to talk to them at the side of the road, am I picking a good spot here? Outside the shop, watching people come in and out when you're trying to get a message across is not a good place to stop, for instance.
Yeah. Ian's beard is a real problem for people with, where the facial hair covers the lips. Can be a real problem. Can be a real problem. Somebody needed to say something. Yeah, I know, Ian. You say everything with such a lovely hug anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's sometimes when you're shocked and you go, oh my God, and you're talking to people and they just have no idea what you're saying. It's just, we do all sorts of things. We do so many. Kev, are you ready for our summary?
Yeah.
Even though it's not. I've even got a body warmer on. It's freezing. One more for Richard.
Very quick one, whilst we're on the subject of beards and things, don't forget we might be going back to work with masks on soon. Just have a think about the effect that might have.
Right. Sorry, we're just communicating.
Fiona? Anyway, so today, mind your language. Communication, two-way. It's not what we say, it's what we don't say. and body language comes into that, the tone of the voice, the eyes, the facial expressions. But if we do it with sincerity and honesty in what we're saying and doing. Some words have lots of variants, like Eskimos and ice, Chris mentioned, and Richard mentioned the rain. And, you know, there's different words for rain. I think that was Chris as well. Foreign students use less language, but might not understand what you mean, and we won't ask their understanding. The jargon may confuse people. Steve mentioned the mirror, signal, maneuver, position, speed, gear, look, all those ones. And then I said about looking at ourselves. Do we actually look at ourselves that often? Do we know what we're doing? Terry asked the we question. We want them to take ownership, so good at the beginning. You know, we work as a team at the beginning, but when they start using phrases, their car is a phrase that shows us that this is happening and they're starting to take ownership and be independent. Matching the language that they use can help. If you're unsure of what they're saying, clarify and ask. Don't be afraid to. Just make sure it's nice and simple. Using their hobbies or what their interests are and adapting to what we do in driving lessons to that can actually be quite interesting, also a bit of fun. I mentioned be curious with your learner to get more information out of them. Road language can be information overload. And also, are they congruent with what they're saying and their body language? Does it match? I think Steve mentioned that one. Changing seats as well, Richard said, you know, give them a different perspective so they can see things different, so it might help. And then different techniques we use is silence, pause, verbal and non-verbal communication, paraphrasing, summarizing. And if we want to stop, think about where we're stopping and the distractions it might cause. So they might not be actually listening. They might be parked outside the shop, was mentioned. And then Terry said with his PDIs, if they want to learn to listen, they've got to learn to shut up. Is the phrase he used there. And then it's all about our listening skills. And one thought I'd leave you with is you cannot not communicate.
Don't think the wrong thing. Don't get it wrong. Thanks, Kev. In fact, thank you, everybody, panel, attendees. Thank you to everyone. Fantastic. It's a wrap. I'm going to end Facebook Live, but thank you for watching on Facebook Live. Do hang around in the as an attendee, and do hang around as a panelist if you would, please. But I'm going to end. Oh, Sunday, the 14th. This coming Sunday, it's the Why Don't You Blue Light Special Part 2. So Blue Light Special Part 1 was really successful. Blue Light Special Part 2, 11 o'clock Sunday, this coming Sunday the 14th. So it's the Blue Light Special Part 2. Thank you very much for watching, and see you all soon. Neil, have you done anything?